Hey everybody, you done dancing from Bad Bunny's halftime performance? Certainly colorful, bright, energetic. Super Bowl turned out not to be as close of a result as maybe some would have liked. However, the Seahawks came out, the Super Bowl champions. I want to dive right into our conversation this week. We are chatting with Tracee Stanford. Tracee Stanford is working on programs for teachers all across the country to teach news and media literacy. Right now, kids are going online and they don't know what's real, what's not, if it's an AI generated video or someone who is not an AI generated person appearing on their TikTok, Instagram, you name it. And they just happen to be spouting their own opinions. And maybe kids don't know the difference between who is a real journalist, who has ethical standards, who has been taught all of the intricacies of the considerations that journalists have before a story is published, but also as a story is pursued. She finds it incredibly important right now in the age of AI in order to make sure that students are receiving news and media literacy. She's an educator herself. She spent years helping underserved children, young adults in Chicago, make sure that they have media production knowledge, but also some of the similar tactics that she's trying to help deploy with the News Literacy Project. Coming off the heels of News Literacy Week, there's a week for everything, right? But I had a very candid conversation with her about some of the questions that kids have these days, even just anybody who is consuming news, going online, and wanting to find objective news. They want to find something that is fair. They want to find something that is fact-based. I asked her point blank, does she actually think that people care about questioning their own judgment of what is real and what's not, of what is news and what's opinion? We'll get in on that. A lot of, or at least several, philosophical questions surrounding journalism and the perception of objective reports here. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with her. Afterward, there's a lot going to be happening this week. Certainly, the Clintons are pushing for a public testimony over these Epstein files. President Trump had said that he's a little uncomfortable of how the Clintons are being treated, in light of the most recent dump of the Epstein files. Jim Comer, he is the head of the House Oversight Committee. Republicans obviously control it. He wants the Clintons to come testify behind closed doors. But the Clintons say, nope, we're going to have it in the public. Well, at least we want to. And let's make it happen. We have nothing to hide. Something to look out for. Other things to piece apart. There's going to be reaction to the Super Bowl halftime performance. Increasingly so, it seems, over the last couple of years that people like to digest a halftime show and try and understand if there were any political messages. This isn't artists in the music world or even just visual medium. They've long inserted political messages into their work. This is nothing new. Certainly there'll be some pushback there. But on top of some of these political controversies and cultural moments in the United States, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Tracee. Diving in on the importance of teaching news literacy to kids. They're certainly just trying to understand what to believe and what not to believe. Could be in the age of big tech, social media, could be a flashpoint. We also talked about how algorithms are shoveling information toward our faces in our screens of things that it seems we largely agree with, disagree with, or it's just content that's going to bring us back for more. And also how to reset your social media feed. With that, let's get into my chat with Tracee Stanford. And joining me now is Tracee Stanford. She is with the News Literacy Project, Senior Manager of Professional Learning, help equip teachers all across the country to make sure that they have the tools necessary to teach kids how to, when they're jumping online in this emerging and ever-expanding digital sphere, that what they are looking at is real, what they can try and use to trust but verify a certain source, and find some objective information. And Tracee, I did a little dig on your bio, but first, thank you for joining Byline. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I know that you have a history with helping underserved kids and young adults in Chicago as well to promote media production skills. You're a high school journalism teacher. I love that you're a journalism junkie at heart, so I'm appreciative. I just really wanted to first ask you, how did you bite the journalism bug at first?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I am so appreciative of this background that I have. So went to college with a love for news and information and studied broadcast journalism and went on to do some reporting in Springfield, Illinois, where I covered state government and politics for a while, and then to Montgomery, Alabama. I covered the state there, did a lot of local reporting and producing for television news before becoming a high school journalism teacher and stepping into the classroom. So I'm happy to have that experience of both practicing the skills of quality journalism and teaching about it. It's really made the work that I do very meaningful and rich.
I imagine so, and I really want to dive in deeper. The first thing I did kind of want to ask you is related to news of the day, and that was following the ousting of a couple hundred Washington Post journalists, many career news reporters. But when you were thinking big picture of the perception, the outside perception of what these firings, these layoffs, whatever you want to call it, have on newsrooms as a whole, does it help? Does it hurt credibility? What's your thought on that?
Yes, great question. It is something to definitely process for newsrooms and for our large audience of educators and youth as well, because they're watching. And they're consuming this information and they're trying to make determinations about the press. And what we recently found in a survey that we did is that 84% of teens nationwide are developing negative impressions of the press and journalism, and many of them think that reporters frequently engage in unethical practices, such as fabricating quotes and information for news reports. And so it's our big job to help change that perception and help to rebuild and restore trust in journalism and help them have a healthy skepticism instead of just being cynical.
What were some of the driving factors in teenagers thinking that journalists are engaging in unethical practices?
Yeah, great question. We are doing lots of studies and learning behind that. One thing that we think is that um, teens are having a hard time determining what is news and knowing what it is that they're seeing. For example, when we surveyed just over 1,100 teens nationwide, many of them were not able to um, pick which of the two sources was more credible. So, for example, a press release, many of them said, over half of them said that the press release was more credible than an actual standards based news story. And so, from that, we're learning that teens, young people are struggling to distinguish news from other kinds of information, like paid ads, for example. In addition to that, we're thinking that their ability to really think about who journalists are is also challenging. Let's just face it, the information landscape looks very different today. Anyone can pick up a camera and report on information and present content online. And so, who do they perceive as actual journalists? And we want them to have ideas and to know what reputable journalism is, because reputable news outlets are going to follow specific ethical codes and have specific ethical values, such
Listen,
as
I went to school
verification.
for it. I had an ethics and journalism, probably, I think I had 2 classes devoted to that. So a full, a year worth of curricula at that point. But before you even start to inform kids, young people, whomever, of who are these journalists with ethical principles, what are their perceptions of an objective journalist?
Yeah, I think that their perceptions of ethical journalists is they're needing some language behind that. We're finding that they don't really know, and so that's why we're making a commitment to teach what credibility looks like. So that's what news literacy is, the ability to determine credible news and other information. And we like to look at that as not teaching them what to think, um, but how to think. And so, if they're trying to determine credible journalists, ethical journalists is, they have to be able to think like a journalist themselves and practice those skills of how to think and look for the values, right, that is going to deem someone credible.
You and I, we at least I'll speak for myself. I'd like to think that I truly understand the role of an ethical journalist. I deploy these tools throughout my daily life as a local journalist here in Washington, D.C. I'm working for an independent outlet. So I'm just curious to figure out what kind of advice are you giving these students to not necessarily just tell them what is an ethical journalist, but so that they can discover it on their own?
Yes, I think that the more that we are able to help students practice the skills of quality journalism, then they will understand that. They will be able to develop an appreciation and know who to trust. And one way that we get them to practice those skills on their own, we have several lessons and resources, but one that I like to talk about is it legit? Is it legit? Is going to teach 5 steps for determining the credibility of a news source.
Okay.
And one of those steps is doing a quick search, really pausing and doing a quick search. So, for example, if you're online and information source seems unfamiliar, let's not stay there on that unfamiliar source and sort of read up and down and vertically, we like to call it, and dig deeper. We want to practice what's called lateral reading. So come out of that source, open up new tabs horizontally, and see what other people have to say about that source.
I mean,
And work.
physically, that's probably difficult when it's not necessarily lateral swiping on TikTok and Instagram from reel to reel. You're going up and down, and it's easy to just accept what you see in front of you and move on. And I imagine that's a barrier here.
Could be, but we're also going to follow step 2, which is to look for the standards of quality journalism. So again, verification. Is there evidence that the content that we're looking at has been verified? Has there been any efforts to fact check? Is there an avoidance of bias? Are there even multiple credible sources within that content? Or are we just hearing from just one source that may or may not be a balanced, full picture? And so, again, it's about building up that tool belt and practicing a healthy skepticism so that they're able to make good judgments for themselves, for their health, their wealth, and make good choices for community issues, the places they live, and the things they care about.
A lot of journalism really comes down to the roads, the sidewalks, the stop signs, community journalism. It doesn't have to be, the biggest scandal in the world. Certainly journalists like to go after big pieces, investigative pieces, but a lot of it is just how is it going to impact your day-to-day life? I want to ask you though, what are some kinds of misinformation today that are prevalent online on social media where a lot of these young minds are right now, where they're consuming information? What kinds of misinformation are they coming across the most?
There are many types of misinformation, fabricated content, information that's just taken out of context. We might be reporting about a weather disaster, but that actually happened 5 years ago. So things
Mhm.
are taken out of context. Additionally, even satire, some things are placed there online meant to be humorous, but the problem is that some people miss those cues and then spread that misinformation. And so we do try to teach students those types so that they're building the spidey senses to be able to detect misinformation online and hopefully stop the spread of it.
What pieces of advice do you have for students who may go on social media and the algorithms are feeding them content that is bringing them back for more, right? We know that this is the case, so that when they are jumping online that, possibly if they are looking for credible sources that they're getting them.
It's hard, right? We're online. I'm a mom. I have a middle school student, and she'll come to me. For example, the bunnies jumping on the trampoline. Both her and I originally saw this clip, and oh, they're so cute. You want to believe it.
Was it AI?
It was definitely AI.
Yeah.
But what can we do? I mean, there are visual clues. We can look, we can see and hear, but we have to go a step further beyond the visual clues and we have to consider the source and the context. So, again, we have to make a commitment to get outside of our feelings a bit and those visual clues and look for more standards based coverage. And if a certain video, clip, picture cannot be verified through a reputable source or through maybe a tool like reverse image search, then we should be skeptical of it.
How much does it worry you that as AI is developing rapidly, I mean, it is increasingly harder to discern what is an AI generated clip, video, audio than it was just a year ago? I myself, 2 months ago, thought I was pretty savvy and I can, catch a couple of things here, the red flags, if you will, here and there. I still think that I can, but to me, it does seem a little bit more difficult. How much does that really worry you that fabricated videos say end up getting more clicks than something that was shot organically, real by a news organization, that those videos get picked up and disseminated and that they are more widely believed as true than what is reality?
Yes, the truth is AI is growing rapidly, and we're going to continue to see that. But what we need to do is one, we don't want to make it all bad. No, we want to grow with the changes in our information landscape. And again, just build that healthy skepticism. We need to equip our tool belts with the skills. Again, and that's what news literacy is, having those skills for determining what's credible. And we are just so excited that many educators are realizing this and they're bringing these skills into their classrooms and teaching news literacy. Yeah. And so we feel great about that.
Let me use that as a piggyback. When does news literacy education work? Give me a couple examples that you've come across.
Well, absolutely. We have an online e-learning platform, for example, Checkology, and teachers are taking full advantage of this resource, bringing highly engaged lessons into their classroom about topics such as misinformation, algorithms and AI, and democracy and the First Amendment. And by walking their students through these lessons, we are seeing lots of growth. We're tracking the growth of what students are able to do pre-assessment, before using these tools, and then at the post-assessment. And so we feel that news literacy is definitely working. And again, we're just very excited that teachers are supporting this and bringing these skills into their classroom.
What concerns you the most about the lack of teaching news literacy in schools?
It's just such a necessary skill. News literacy is a 21st century skill, so it should be guaranteed for all students. And we are seeing some movement behind that. Currently, 3 states are required to teach news literacy. And those states are Illinois, New Jersey, and Connecticut. And so we just want to see more movement, more traction behind making news literacy required because it's a very, very important skill.
Let me move on to this. Do people really care about questioning their own judgment?
That's a great question. Yeah, sometimes we just want to believe what we want to believe, right? Sort of to have our own thoughts and thinking confirmed, like confirmation bias is what it's called. And so that's the struggle. But we're all struggling with this, even teens. And it's just so important, I think, that we think about the overall health of our information environment, and the more that we can get everyone involved in just understanding that how our own actions really play a part in the health of our democracy as a whole, then that becomes very helpful.
What concerns you the most about the First Amendment right now? I've had previous conversations with lawyers who represent people with First Amendment related cases. I've had interviews with professors in political ethical communication, et cetera. But you have a Washington Post reporter whose home was searched by federal investigators recently. Don Lemon obviously was arrested, whether you think that he was acting ethically or not, it's up for your own interpretation. But, there's some examples recently that First Amendment advocates are really concerned about. Would the news literacy project, or how do you think teachers can explain to students what this current moment means for reporters?
Well, yes. So I think that it's just an awareness and understanding, having the conversations about what's happening in our world. It's very much uncharted times when you think about it, and having an understanding of what the freedoms are, what the rights are. And we have a number of ways that we support teachers in doing that. For example, Our daily do now activity is another resource that we offer. These are quick 5-minute activities that spark discussion around questions that are similar to what you just asked, where students and educators can begin to unpack this in the classroom. And sometimes it's just about making space for that conversation. And so, again, the daily do nows can be found in our weekly newsletter, the SIFT. So anyone can sign up and receive that newsletter and stay up to date on the happenings of news literacy and link to the daily do now activities. And so what educators will get is a daily do now for each day of the week, and they will all be tied to a standard of quality journalism, which is very helpful for students.
What are some of the biggest questions that you hear directly from teachers before they deploy any information into the classroom?
Oh yeah. Again, I think that where teachers struggle the most, and it's where I struggle as a classroom teacher, is really about time, because they have a lot on their plates. And so, again, with many areas and many states nationwide, with this not being actually a required classroom offering, it's really about making the time for it. And so, we really try to do our best to make that an easy process for them, as easy as we possibly can, with the types of resources that we provide that are easily able to be integrated into their current curriculum and provide an avenue to have news literacy within their classroom. So,
Listen, I mean, teachers give up so much. My sister's an educator. Both of my parents are career educators. I am very keenly aware of the sacrifices that they make. Let me ask you
yeah.
this. What kinds of teachers are actually teaching news literacy? Is it history? Is it English? Is it civics teachers?
Yeah, there's something for everyone when it comes to news literacy. And you'll find on Checkology 20 plus lessons. And each of those lessons, there's a connection to every discipline that you can think of. So whether you are teaching math, whether you're a social studies teacher, history teacher, something is there for you on Checkology.
If somebody wants to reset their social media feed and try and find some objective, reliable sources, is there a way to go about it and possibly avoid the algorithm creeping back in and feeding you clickbait type information and stray you off the path of information that is real?
Oh, right, right, right. And so maybe you don't want as many bunny videos that
Bunnies and
aren't quite
trampolines,
real.
it's cute, but maybe put that aside, right? At least for the sake of this point here. Yeah, I'm just curious how
Mhm.
you might be able to reset your feed.
Yeah, so the quickest and easiest thing to do is to just start to change some habits and follow more standards-based types of accounts. So the more that we're doing that, you'll see things begin to look a bit differently on your feed. And so really consider the source of content that you're seeing and begin to follow more standards-based news.
I had thought of this earlier because of the news from the Washington Post layoffs. Even with staff numbers shrinking, even with shrinking staffs, what core principles of strong journalism, in your opinion, remain non negotiable?
Sure, it's non-negotiable to present information without verifying the facts. Verification is highly essential. And it's just what we know is that there's a lot of information online, and the vast majority of it is unverified. And so we have to, again, do some of those fact checking skills on our own and make sure that wherever we're getting this content, that there is some evidence that information has been verified. So that is definitely non-negotiable.
Are students being taught that there's much more at stake than reputation here? Newsrooms are bound by federal regulation licenses in order
Yeah.
to operate. Fact checking is also a legal process too. If someone ultimately sues for defamation, a journalist and their legal team on the back end, they could say, well, here's the information that we got. Here's the process of how we went after this information that was ethical. Is that something that's also being taught too, that the reason why journalists are pursuing fact-based reporting?
Absolutely, you're right. Reputable news organizations are following high standards, and so they have much, much more at stake.
If a reporter is gathering information and someone sues for defamation after a story happens, they're able to show their own legal team, hey, this is the process that we went about it. This is the verified information. We checked it, etc. Just give me some examples if you could, or one example of journalists going about all of this.
This brings to mind one of our Checkology lessons, Democracy's Watchdog. And in this lesson, the reporter takes us through a personal journey of how, when he and some reporter colleagues worked for the Tampa Bay Times, and they did an investigative story about a battery plant in Tampa, Florida, that did not follow some safety regulations, putting themselves into harm's way as long as their families and community. And so their efforts really shine the light on the importance of a watchdog role of journalism. And so that's definitely one to look at to dive a little bit deeper.
Are there any new emerging core principles of ethical journalism that maybe are considered now as opposed to 10, 20, 50 years ago that are being taught?
A new emerging core principles. That's that's a really good question.
Maybe new checks on the way that journalists can solidify their reporting before it's published. Anything that maybe they're considering now versus 10, 20, 50 years ago.
Yeah, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I'm very much a traditionalist when it comes to reporting and focusing on the standards. I will say that with the prevalence of what how often people get news from social media, and how AI is now so prevalent and changing rapidly.
Sure,
We
that's
just
a
have to
glaring one
keep
for me, yeah.
our eyes on that. And there are a number of tools that help to identify AI detection tools. And those are good, but that's one place to start. We don't want to solely rely on detection tools. We do want to come back to, again, even the visual clues and then looking beyond those visual clues for source and context.
Obviously, journalists have a major role in sustaining a healthy news ecosystem. How about consumers? What kind of role do they have, and how important is it?
Consumers also play a big role. No one's perfect, but when we put the effort in to value and have high standards for the information that we seek out and produce and share, then that becomes very, very valuable. So I think consumers play a part in that too, because we're often each other's example. And so we want to have high standards and bring others along on that journey so that we can begin to skillfully make good judgments about, again, the things that we hold true and that are meaningful to us in our information landscape.
Two final questions, I promise, and I know your time is very valuable, so
No
thank
worries.
you. What's one simple habit that someone can use to reduce their trigger happiness to share a post, if you will?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So slowing down, that's a simple one, but it's
Taking a breather,
also
like mom taught us.
just slowing down and doing that, you might come across, a red flag that will allow you to think about it a little bit differently. Reading beyond the headlines, we don't want to just take that first piece of information without digging a little bit deeper. So we got to read beyond the headlines as well.
Are you optimistic about the next generation's relationship with news? Why or why not?
I am very optimistic about the next generation's, take on news and this information landscape. They're very savvy. They're very savvy and also have a huge trust in our educators who are supporting them and behind them and sort of making the path clear and straight. So, with that savviness and, great guides, I'm positive about the future of our information landscape.
Tracee, you've given me a number of great resources that I personally am going to look into with the News Literacy Project. What's the best way that people can find more with the News Literacy Project?
Absolutely. Please head to our website, newslit.org. You'll find a ton of resources there. This is National News Literacy Week, the seventh annual National News Literacy Week, and we're excited about that. And so it's not too late to get involved, to jump in. So on our webpage, you'll find links there to an activity planner, things to do in the classroom every day of the week. And you can register for webinars happening this month.
And anyone who's listening right now here on Byline, I'm going to be having links directly to the News Literacy Project too, and some of those resources that you laid out. So if you're interested, it's going to be in the bio of this episode. Tracee Stanford, I appreciate the work that you do, and I'm also greatly appreciative of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Tracee. I think it's important right now to ask the questions about what kids are wondering when they go on social media, what they think is news, what they are hoping to discover as news, and possibly how folks who have their hands on the levers of power are able to make sure that we don't go down the wrong route and misinformation has become increasingly or more increasingly prevalent. But who knows? There may be bad actors out there that's exactly what they want to do to advance their narrative. But Tracee has some good insight about the hard work that they're doing at the News Literacy Project. I'd be increasingly interested to see if more states adopt some laws or establish some initiatives to teach news literacy for students. She had mentioned Connecticut, New Jersey, and Illinois had done so. They're at various stages of this process. Curious if Congress brings it up for consideration. Don't forget, before the congressional midterms, I'm certain that AI and AI regulation and social media regulation will be part of the conversation of some campaign platforms, whether it be the midterms or before the 2028 presidential race. That aside, a couple other headlines to look out for. We know that the Clintons are saying, hey, we have nothing to hide about the questions surrounding any possible connection reference in the Epstein files. We know former President Bill Clinton's name, and some photos have appeared in some of the discovery, some of the photos and texts, emails, etc., anything that's been documented inside of the Epstein files, which we know only a sliver has been released. The DOJ has passed the deadline, relatively long past the deadline, in order to release everything, redact the victims' names. We know that there have been issues where victims' names have not been redacted, but people sending questionable messages, some of them creepy, they have been redacted. So the social media sphere that is certainly trying to look for more transparency in the Epstein dissemination of information from the Epstein files. They're increasingly looking for more. As we know, the DOJ has passed that deadline in order to release the documents, with the exception of information that would identify and harm victims. But back to what we had mentioned, the House Oversight Committee, which is controlled by Republicans right now, they want the Clintons to come testify, face some questions. They want this to be done behind closed doors. But the Clintons, former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton, and former President Bill Clinton say, nope, we would like to have it in public. We have nothing to hide. President Trump, after an interview with Tom Yamas, the current anchor of NBC Nightly News, had said that he feels somewhat uncomfortable with how Bill Clinton had been treated in light of all of this. That's what he said. And who knows, there may be new revelations that come about after this hearing, if there is one at all, with the House Oversight Committee and the Clintons. Who knows if there are more revelations from those who have access to unredacted versions of these documents? Will they talk to sources? Will they talk to journalists? Will those journalists start to do the work in order to provide more information? We're going to have to see. We don't know. All right, separately, it seems that Venezuela has been out of the headlines largely recently. Nicolas Maduro still, as far as we know, within the state of New York after he was captured. There does not appear to be many headlines right now of how the White House is advancing on any specific policy goals in Venezuela, whether that be to install who many international analysts see as the duly elected president of Venezuela and replace the existing government or the government that was left behind. that was largely tied to Nicolas Maduro. I'm increasingly curious to hear how the State Department is handling the governance of Venezuela, the oversight of said governance of Venezuela, what Venezuela's cooperation with the United States is like. I would love to learn a little bit more about the United States' efforts to, you know, gain revenue from oil that Venezuela has at their fingertips. From my perspective, I haven't seen nearly as many headlines about that, certainly in the now couple of weeks since Nicolas Maduro was captured and brought over to U.S. soil to face charges. Keep an eye on that for sure. All right. Latin American music superstar Bad Bunny headlined the Super Bowl halftime show. He brought out some surprise guests: Ricky Martin, Lady Gaga. Oh man, a lot of my friends and myself went wild over that surprise appearance after her beautiful Tiffany type blue dress came out and she sang a salsa version of Die with a Smile. I won't geek out here. I won't Gaga geek out here. But people online, they said, some people, let me backtrack. Some people online, critics say, well, we didn't understand what he was saying. We weren't necessarily a fan. Others say, listen, we don't really care if we knew what he was saying or not. He was largely performing, rapping, singing, whatever you want to call it, in Spanish. President Trump came out and said that he didn't like it at all. He thought it was disgraceful. He took issue with some of the dancing. Others thought that it was a celebration of several cultures, multicultures in Latin America, all through the Americas, as my ear was able to pick up at the tail end of Bad Bunny's performance. And there was a big old projection, if you will, on one of the jumbotrons at the stadium in Santa Clara, California, in the Bay Area near San Francisco, where the Super Bowl was being held. And that was talking about how love triumphs over hate. Certainly, folks will dissect this politically speaking. I had mentioned at the top of this, it's nothing new that artists insert politics, make political messages, whether it be in music, whether it be in visual art, or elsewhere. But keep an eye on that throughout the week. Sure, it's going to be a talker, continuously so. All right, I will give you a little tease of some upcoming interviews that I have. I'm going to be chatting with Michael LaRosa. Michael LaRosa was the former press secretary for Jill Biden, former First Lady Jill Biden. He had left his time in the East Wing before the end of President Joe Biden's sole term in office as president of the United States. We're going to dive in on some Democratic strategy, what's going to likely could work and what could shoot themselves in the foot headed into the midterms, and some of the tight wires that they're going to have to walk or could be walking in the months ahead. Some variables that might be sticking their neck out there. This follows my previous conversation with Matt Hurt. Matt Hurt is the president of the Arlington, Virginia GOP party about Republican strategy headed into the midterms. I'll be curious to see how their answers copy one another's. If there's some messaging on the economy that folks want to hone in on, Republicans are certainly going to have to tell voters about their record, their track record, since they were elected to Congress in the majority in 2024. But if Hakeem Jeffries might be the next Speaker of the House if Democrats win the House, is there actually a likely scenario where Democrats might win the Senate? Again, all these questions I'm going to chime in with Michael. But I'm going to have a special episode dropping this week with Peter Loge. Peter Loge is the head of the Center of Ethics and Political Communication at George Washington University. You might have seen him on this podcast previously. He was my inaugural episode. I'm going to be chatting with him about President Trump's recent repost, if you will, on his social media account that included the racist imagery of former President Barack Obama and former First Lady Michelle Obama, depicting them as apes. President Trump claims that he didn't see it. He saw the portion of the post that was talking about alleged election fraud. But there have been several other examples and questions about ethics and political communication from Republicans and Democrats. But also, I'd like to get maybe a little bit of insight into how people are responding to Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance. We got a lot to get to. Peter is always a great conversation. He's lively and he's very candid. He doesn't hold back. So I'm looking forward to that episode dropping this week. Look out for it. I will tease it on social media. One more thing. My heart continues to ache for Savannah Guthrie and her family, Today's Show co-anchor, as they're looking for their mom, Nancy. All I can say is I'm keeping them in my thoughts and prayers. I hope you are too. It's just incredibly scary. And I can't imagine what they're going through. I just hope that all the resources are being deployed to find Nancy safely. To keep them in your thoughts and prayers. They're in mine, for sure. What questions do you have? You know where to reach me, but you can always email me. Email me at bylinewithbendennis@gmail.com. What questions do you have for some folks that I've had on, the interviews that I've done recently? Who do you might want me to have on to ask some questions, whether it be about journalism, whether it be about politics, whether it be about culture, education, health, you name it. I want to take your questions, as you know, to the experts, to those who are the change makers, and those who have some inside information, because that's my goal here. That's my goal. Ask the questions about stories that will drive the headlines tomorrow. I need your help. Email me, bylinewithbendennis@gmail.com. We're going to do it together and interview the change makers, those with insight, expertise, analysis. Like my day job, I'm staying objective. I'm going to remain that way. I find that is the best way to get answers truthfully and honestly, and press people for some real, believable answers that are based in fact. All right, with that, let's get out of here. Enjoy your week, everybody. I'll see you again with that special episode later this week. Take it easy.